Hey guys, welcome back. Happy Hump Day. Today we are going to talk about clinical discipline. This is another one of the core values that Michelle and I put together, kind of representing what we're advocating and what we're pushing for. I guess you could say the foundation of a movement that we would love to see start. And again, I have to repeat that these core values are not meant to be exhaustive. They're not meant to be perfect. They're not meant to be the be all end all. It's really meant to be a starting point for us to kind of start reining in the problems we're facing in EMS and start getting a grip on things so that we actually can better ourselves and better our industry. So what is clinical discipline? In short, it's maintaining a confident professional manner while demonstrating respect and concern because it is important to gain patients' trust and achieve control over the scene. Now, that's very wordy and clinical sounding, so let's break it down a little bit. So, in a very narrow sense, it just means the ability to be in charge of your emotions during the clinical decision-making process. And this is something that I would say is true broadly of emergency medicine, but is especially essential in EMS because we are in very chaotic, uncontrolled, unpredictable scenes all the time. That is our norm. And we're in situations where it's very natural for our own emotions to come into play and to dictate what we're doing and potentially hijack what we're doing. So it's so important to have this discussion about emotional regulation because it affects everything. You're probably getting tired of hearing it because Michelle and I beat that drum so damn hard. But broadly talking about clinical discipline, it's bringing emotional regulation to bear in all aspects of our job as a provider. It's not just about, self-control and being stoic and all of that, but it ultimately comes down to what is best for the patient, what's best for the other responders. And that is for us to get our shit together. And I get it. Like, you'll have shit going on at home that's on your mind, and that can disrupt very quickly your flow at work, how you're running calls. You have money trouble. You have conflict with your partner, conflict with management. There's, generally speaking, I've seen there's a lot of, we have a natural inclination, a natural tendency towards negativity, towards emotional dysregulation. And part of it I could see coming from, well, we have to have all of our shit on lock so much for running calls that when we're not on calls, we just don't give a fuck. The problem is that mentality eventually slips into how you run calls. And you will actually be bringing that negative, aggressive, unnecessarily unprofessional mentality to how you run calls. So it's ultimately counterproductive. And no, the solution is not to be an emotional robot. I would advocate that when you're on a call, the attitude I've always maintained that has worked for me, maybe it'll work for you, I don't know. Sometimes anything's possible, I guess. But the mentality that's always worked for me is the sicker a patient is, the more I look at them as a mannequin. And now you could say, well, that's horrible. You're dehumanizing a patient having an emergency. It's not that I actually think of that person as a thing instead of an actual human being. What that is it is a short-term emotional delusion, if you will. And why is that? Because it's not reality. They're not actually a mannequin. They're a living, breathing, or previously breathing individual that has a life, that has a history, that has family, that has emotions, that have all of those things. Okay, yes, that is true. But in that moment, you have to literally suspend your own normal, natural emotions and act in the best interest of the patient. The way to do that, to do a, if you will, inhuman thing, and I don't mean inhuman by cruel, but an abnormal thing. It's not normal for us to want to suppress emotions or restrain those strong emotions like that. But you're doing it because if you don't, you're going to become emotionally invested in the call and you're going to start to make mistakes. Now, yes, you should treat every patient as you would treat your own family members. And I say treat in the sense of both clinically and interpersonally. And my kids will tell you this, and maybe some people could question my parenting on this, but when when one of my kids gets hurt, let's just use that for example. Well, actually, I'll give an example. We were pretty confident that my daughter broke her arm. This was like, year and a half ago, 2 years ago, I can't remember. And in the moment, she's freaking out. It's a little bit of chaos, but in that moment, I had to literally switch on my paramedic brain, take a deep breath, speak to her calmly, and gain some control of the situation. No, I was not functioning as her paramedic at that time. However, me projecting that calm to her is not me not taking her pain seriously, but it is me projecting confidence and calm in a chaotic moment. So in the same, so you're doing it with a purpose. It's not that you don't care. It's not that you don't have an emotional investment or that you won't be stressed out about it eventually. But in the moment when it matters, you're able to get your shit under control. So the way I sum this up is you run the call, you don't let the call run you. You take responsibility for controlling your speech, your body language, for managing how people are talking to each other on a scene. All of that is incredibly vital to you doing your job. And if you think that you don't have to have some level of being a people person to do this job well, somebody lied to you. So much of this job is how you talk to people, and not just being professional, not just yes ma'am, no ma'am, yes sir, no sir, that kind of thing. Because I would argue that actually isn't something that rigidly you should hold to. But the energy that you communicate to these people, the energy that you project to them, should be one of confidence and reassurance. Because even if you are like, holy shit, there's so much to do, this patient's circling the drain, they're going to be lucky if they make it halfway alive to the hospital, you can't project that to the family. You can project to them that this is serious, but you should be projecting confidence to them, even if you're faking it, even if you are, shitting your pants, whether literally or figuratively. Your job is to communicate strength and confidence and competence. So by getting your emotions under control, that actually does enable you to do your job better. Now, for some people, this just takes a little bit of premeditation. It takes a little bit of self-reflection and some basic, breathing exercises. I am very big on controlling my breathing. So the more stressed out a situation is, the more likely I am to be taking a nice deep slow breath to just keep myself calm. And that's all I need. That's been because I've had this mentality from day one, I've never known any other way of doing it. I'm not sitting here bragging or tooting my own horn. I consider myself lucky that of all the things that people deal with and struggle with in EMS, this is not one that I have to deal with. But for some people, their issues are more complex. You may have complex PTSD. You may have bipolar. You may have other things at play that require additional help. So you may need therapy. You may need more intervention to be able to reach that point where you can emotionally regulate and show some clinical discipline. However, by that same token, you also need to be willing to say, hey, I can't do this. Because no, it won't be listed on any job description that you have to, you have to have emotional regulation. But this is part of the job. So if you can't do it, it's okay. It's fine. There's nothing wrong with that. But be willing to have the humility to know when it's time to step away and when it isn't. And that can happen on the very front of your career. I've heard plenty of stories of people who quit in the first few weeks and just said, nope, this isn't for me. But there's just as many people who get 10, 15, 20 years in their career, and whatever their demons are catch up to them, and they have to hang it up and can't keep doing it anymore. So you should be reevaluating yourself throughout the course of your career. That sounds all great, high and mighty and pious and what the fuck ever, but the harsh reality is that EMS is statistically the most likely to commit, to, engage in SI. I don't know if I want to say the full S word. I don't know if that'll get me in trouble on the world of socials, but anyway, we are some of the most likely people to die that way. And why is that? I would argue that, yes, we see horrible things, but it's how we deal with them that either gets us to or keeps us away from that point where you feel like you have no other options. So why this is so important now isn't just because of your professional career and, how you talk to people, your, customer service voice or what the fuck ever. But it is ultimately about your mental health and your well-being. Because you don't want to be in a situation where you're giving your family your emotional leftovers. I believe in conserving your emotional energy. So it's not that you kill your emotions, and it's not that you don't have any ever. It just means that you rein them in, you manage and allocate them, and save that emotional energy for the things and people that really matter to you. So instead of forming an emotional connection to every sick child that you ever meet, save that emotional connection for your kids. Save that emotional connection for your spouse. Save that emotional connection for your hobbies, the things that mean something to you in your personal life, that are there when no one else is. So you're ultimately doing yourself a favor by learning emotional regulation and practicing it. And eventually it translates into the rest of your life. I don't know if any of you have watched the show Ozark. It's on Netflix. It's one of my favorite TV shows there. And it's honestly my favorite series / movie that I've ever seen Jason Bateman in. He's a great actor. I just don't normally care for most of the movies that he does. But his character, I love it because the entire world can be falling apart. Just completely going to shit. And you're on one cliffhanger after another, after another, after another. And, he's right in the middle of either a life or death situation, or he's about to lose millions of dollars or whatnot. And he sits there, he's like, okay, so here's what we're going to do. Da, 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 and just is totally, completely unfazed by it. That is obviously is a fictional character, but that level of emotional well-being and control in crisis is, to me, is like goals, straight up. That's what I would love, to have that level of self-control. And it only benefits you. Like, what do most people do in crisis? They panic. So if you're one of the 1% of people that won't panic in crisis, think about how that translates to the rest of your life. Think about how that stabilizes your emotional well-being outside of work, when looking at politics, when dealing with stuff with family, when dealing with interpersonal drama, whatever the fuck it is. You have perspective and you're able to keep shit under control and think and act decisively and have your feelings later. I'm not saying that you suppress, because outright suppression is not a good thing. But if you're able to allocate your emotional resources effectively, it's only going to help you in the long run. Trust me, it's worth it. It requires a lot of work. And we are exposed to horrible things. We are exposed to literally some of the worst of humanity outside of being front lines on a military conflict, this is about the most horrific shit that you can see on a consistent basis. So yes, we we are constantly put in situations that most people will experience maybe once in their lifetime, and we go through it and then go just argue about what we want for lunch after. So, all of the, to me, I would think this is common sense, but being able to master yourself is the best way to be able to have the life that you want, have the career that you want, have the relationships that you want. If you can control yourself, what you want, what you think, what you do, then your whole life gets a little bit easier. Not saying it's, easy peasy, smooth sailing, whatever, but the people that I have seen that make it a long time in this career are the ones who can emotionally regulate and properly allocate their emotional resources. So go out and touch some grass now and then. Go spend some time bettering yourself. Connect with other people. Get your head out of EMS. Gain some perspective and see what your life is like. See how good life is. And be willing to challenge the way you do things. Because coping mechanisms and strategies and everything, if I could just have one takeaway from this particular topic, it's have the ability to question how you do things and why you do them, and be willing to grow and adapt and better yourself and better your emotional awareness, because you have to be aware of your emotions and what brings them on, what you do to control them. All you have to have that awareness before you can actually do anything. So take some time to figure yourself out. What are your buttons that people can press? What are the ways that you can mitigate those issues? How can you manage stress and cortisol release in your body in an effective, consistent way that it becomes habit and second nature to you? You don't have to think about it when you're in the middle of a shit hit the fan situation. That's all I got for you guys. Be safe, and I will talk to you tomorrow. Bye-bye.